Thank you, Clive. I guess none of us in this room need reminding of where we were 12 months ago and how our lunch was disrupted. But I do kind of now dispute whether this is actually the 11th conference, because I think it's probably actually only the 10th, because that one was cancelled, or it might be 10.5 rather than 11. Can I start first by carrying on from where the Minister and Mayor Bob Parker acknowledged the superb efforts and support that you all had put into the response in Christchurch. And as you heard, as part of the commemorative services in Christchurch last week, I was invited by the Mayor to receive the City Council's Civic Award to Civil Defence for service that you provided to the City during the response. It was an honour to receive that award, and I did so on your behalf. But of course, as the Minister indicated, listening to the stories of those who also served the community, and particularly those who carried out acts of courage and heroism, it makes our own personal contribution somewhat meagre. But I acknowledge your efforts, and I thank you for those efforts, and the award that the Mayor presented to me will be mounted and framed and mounted in the Ministry's foyer area. I think we've all changed since 22nd of February, no matter where you live. I think we have changed in our attitude to the big one. I think we have changed our attitude to managing large-scale responses in New Zealand. And I think councils and other organisations that are involved in communities and involved in civil defence in particular have taken the 22nd of February experience as a bit of a wake-up call. And this audience, I think, only knows too well that it could happen again, and it could happen to any of us. On a more personal note, and brought home again by the video that the Mayor showed at the end of his presentation, as well as by attending the commemorative services last week, I really still do continue to feel for those living in Christchurch who have gone through the impact itself and who have had to live with and endure those aftershocks that have occurred ever since. And I think their determination and their fortitude really does set the standard for other communities, which I hope through our work in civil defence and emergency management we can encourage our communities and other places to attain the same level of fortitude. So my objective this morning in this presentation is to provide you with some of the insights and observations that I have developed from my time as National Controller in Christchurch during the response. And I'm going to provide you with some of the thinking that I've done around implementing some of the adjustments that I think is necessary to ensure that we can do better in the next crisis, whenever, wherever and whatever that might be. So as a personal health and safety warning, I'm not going to go anywhere near issues that are being considered by the Royal Commission. And I'm very conscious that our independent review that is now underway with Mr. Ian McLean and David Alton is going to traverse a whole raft of observations itself, and I'm hoping that most of the issues that I'm going to discuss this morning will also be covered by the review team. So the health and safety messages, these are my observations. They're not as a result of any formal review, but I think we will find some common ground with those reviews. And the last message in health and safety is I'm not going to talk about the recovery process that is underway in Christchurch with the CERA and the Council. I think we need a little bit more water to go under the bridge before we can start to review that process fully. So let me start by saying I think the response itself was excellent. And in particular, I again applaud the initiative, the courage and the energies of Christchurch residents during those initial response activities on the afternoon and the evening of 22nd of February. Those actions involved not just the emergency services, which did a fantastic job, as did the professional civil defence staff, but also citizens helping their fellow citizens, and frequently by putting themselves and their own lives and safety at risk to help others. and their actions, as I indicated, showed some incredible acts of persistence and courage in trying to rescue people, and most of those actions were taken on by people who we'll probably never really able to identify and know about. The initial response in the CBD and in the suburbs has provided us with a fantastic example of community spirit and an idea of what community resilience really should look like, and again, it sets a benchmark for other civil defence emergency management groups to aim for. This morning the Minister indicated where his priorities for civil defence lie in the few years ahead, and obviously his priorities become my work plan. I expect the observations I'm going to discuss this morning will be part of the recommendations of the review, and they will also form part of the Minister's priorities. So I'm going to put my observations into the themes of risk reduction, readiness and response, although not necessarily in that order, and that'll become obvious in a second. And as I do this, I'd ask you to remember, this is not going to be the full list, because the list is quite long, and there are others that are going to come into the list, and perhaps some will drift out. As you well appreciate, our approach to civil defence and emergency management in New Zealand has two key components: the concept of resilience and the concept of managing risk. The Canterbury situation suggests that those two elements have stood the test of time well and do not need to be changed or given radical surgery. As I've already indicated, we've seen examples of resilience in Christchurch and the part played by risk management as well. Of course, there are things that can be improved, but our approach to civil defence and emergency management is sound and appropriate in this country. Now to areas where we might want to make some improvement. In terms of risk management, the Christchurch scenario suggests there is a need to revisit and re-emphasise the value of integrating our understanding of hazards and risks with land use planning and civil defence plans. How else are we to manage the problem with liquefaction and subsidence in places like Bexley, or the risk of rockfalls, saying nothing of balancing the risk of a large earthquake in any particular location with the appropriate building codes, as Richard Sharp has just illustrated? If the three aspects of hazards and risks, land use planning and civil defence are separated, communities, I think, run the risk of facing a repeat of some of the problems we faced in Christchurch. And it will become an agenda item of me to encourage councils to integrate these three critical elements of risk management, and I would encourage you people to do the same wherever you possibly can. Now I'm going to jump over readiness and go to the response and then come back to readiness. So these are some of the lessons I've drawn from the response. It is important as we go through these to remind ourselves, though, that it is very, very easy to identify all the sorts of problems and improvements that you might well want to have in place well after the event, when we're clear of the adrenaline rush and the chaos and the inevitable concerns that exist in the initial part of the response. But that must not be an excuse for not looking at how we can improve our operation. So I'm going to start by getting my frustrations off my chest early. My first frustration in the response was the challenge we had in generating an organisational structure that would work for me as the National Controller and have the scale and the capacity to deal with the scale of response we were dealing with. I know my organisational design irritated a few, but it was important to me to separate the monitoring of operations and tasks from the planning function. The structure used initially had the potential to work well, but the pace of the operations already underway by the time I got there on the second day meant that it was difficult to take time out to explain to staff how I wanted the thing to operate and to have time to build an operational culture within the organisation and to develop a spirit of cooperation. As I look back, I think we were a bit disjointed and tended to run functions in parallel. And I have it on my list of to-dos to come up with a structure that is suitable for managing large-scale crises response, and to use that across not just civil defence, but suggest it to other lead agencies as well. Setting the operational priorities was straightforward and largely self-evident. At first, we were to rescue those that were trapped, treat the injured, and ensure that the citizens of Christchurch had access to sources of food and water and shelter of some sort. The second phase started after the chances of finding those trapped in buildings and still alive was considered to be low. Then the rescue operation became an operation to recover the deceased, and at the same time the effort to ensure people in the community were well looked after was ramped up to become the priority in the third phase. Community well-being was always going to be a critical part of the response. But looking back, I now think the welfare function, not just in Christchurch but in other areas as well, needs to be elevated in our thinking and operation in an ops centre so that it does become the front line of the response. To make welfare work well, it needs to be well planned, it obviously needs to be well managed, it needs to be well supported logistically and integrated with other plans and operations of the response. I think we have a bit of work to do in this area to ensure that we do deliver the right sort of support to the right places to the people that are affected. And when you think about it, the only reason we're doing this is because there are people that are out there affected, and they have to be in our sites. If they're not, we are missing the point. Next, I now think our response was hampered by our poor ability to gain a clear picture of the impact quickly and to have that picture as the centrepiece of our monitoring, control and coordination of the response. And that picture has to be the knowledge base on which our planning is based. Yes, we lacked IT support at first, and the layout of the art gallery did not lend itself to sharing information around a central hub. But I'm not convinced there was enough reconnaissance done in the first few days, by whatever means were available, to enable us to get a full picture of the impact, and especially away from the CBD and the collapsed buildings. We need to do much better so that we know what has happened, so that we can share the information across all the functions of the Ops Centre, so that we can decide where we need to intervene and quickly plan for whatever that intervention might be. As part of managing the operation, and particularly under the centralised control and coordination of the response under the National Controller, there is a need to improve our liaison and coordination of activities that have been carried out by other agencies. We had liaison officers available to us, but the activities of their departments were not always factored into the planning. Added to that, I think we have to get better at deliberate planning in the response. That is, the discipline of going through a structured process which starts with an identification of what the problem is, sets an objective, figures out what the constraints are, and comes up with the best possible options before suggesting or recommending the way to go. And once that option is accepted by the controller, it gets tasked to assign units and supported logistically, and the job is done. It sounds so easy. Two examples stick in my mind which illustrate it's not that easy. The first is the vexed question of the distribution of portaloos. We knew roughly how many people were off the sewerage system, and we knew roughly where they were. We made a calculation of how many bums on seats, if you'll excuse the expression, and we had a supply line available to provide portaloos and chemical toilets. We'd also organised a gang of people who would be able to distribute the toilets at the agreed distribution rate, and each team was allocated streets to go and deliver the toilets to. How was it then that whole streets came back to report that they'd been missed out. How was it that having delivered the chemical toilets, we then had to go back around again to distribute street tanks and then probably in some cases go back around again and dig them in so that people could actually reach them? These are the issues which should have been sorted out in the planning and in the explanation of the tasking and what was expected to be carried out. Had we done that properly, I think we would have had accolades from the public rather than expressions of great frustration. The second example was the cordon control and managing access to the red zone. Why was it that we did not figure out early on that some form of pass system was going to be required and that it would need to have a bunch of rules about the area that the person might go to and the need for escorts and the rules about conduct when in that area? Having said that, there was a lot of good work done in planning to shrink the cordon down and to allow residents and businesses back in. And there was some very good work done to secure shops in the CBD by putting plywood over doors and windows. Let's turn now to media management and the use of social media. In the response, I personally grossly underestimated how much time and effort was required to manage the media. Apart from being collared at 6 o'clock in the morning by all breakfast channels available, each formal media conference took considerable time to prepare, it took time to deliver, and it took some not inconsiderable time to recover from. While that was going on, I was taken away from the operation and where I think the thinking and the attention probably should have been. As it turned out, the effort that went into media management by a raft of people, not just me and Mayor Bob, paid off, and I think the result was good. But we will need to be much more focused in the future on social media and with the ways to get critical messages to the community in parallel with the normal routine media, because obviously not everyone in the badly affected areas had access to TV or radio. We know that managing the use of the social media will take considerable resources, and it is important that we apply those resources and get amongst it. As an aside on the media, I think we also need to be very careful not to be sucked into always looking where the cameras are looking. Their view will not always be your view and your priority, and you need to ensure that you maintain a much wider view of what has happened in the community. Tomorrow we will hear from Sam Johnson, who ran the Student Army of Volunteers. That and a number of other self-organised groups provided fantastic support to the community. Some were groups that already existed in the community, and some groups formed as a consequence of the quake, either the 22nd or the 4th of September quake. On reflection, I have concluded there are generally two types of volunteers: those that are members of an organised group, either before or during the response, and the true spontaneous volunteer, who are those who turn up with a shovel over their shoulder seeking a task to go and do. From the controller's point of view, the organised groups are easy to manage, if in fact you should manage them at all, and I simply would go to the line of giving them a task and an area, perhaps associated with somebody else, and let them go for it with the understanding that they can call back to the ops centre if they need extra assistance. The spontaneous volunteers, however, need a bit more, and I do not think that we had a mechanism in place in Christchurch to be able to manage them. Again, as another observation, the much later RENA crisis in Tauranga provides some useful hints about how you might manage volunteers and how you might best communicate with them. And I think Civil Defence has a bit of ground to make up here, and as the Minister indicated, this is one of his interests and priorities. Not surprisingly, there is a string of additional observations and issues that could arise from the response, but in the interest of time I'll flip now to the readiness and the preparation aspects. I think the Christchurch experience has shown us the value of being prepared in so many ways. And as Richard Sharp indicated, many of our international partners are taking a keen interest in how prepared our communities were, what actually happened to them, and how well they coped. Starting with the business community. Businesses that were well prepared and had an ability to quickly adapt to the new circumstances were able to survive and to continue to contribute to the local economy. But in Christchurch, we face too many calls at the Ops Centre for assistance with getting businesses into those damaged buildings to recover critical information, which suggests that business continuity planning is weak and I think needs to be re-emphasised. On the other hand, most of the utilities performed extremely well. Dave Brunson is speaking on this topic tomorrow morning, but from the controller's point of view, those utilities that are covered by the Act as lifeline utilities tended to do well, especially telecommunications, electricity, the airport, the port, and fuel supplies. And I'd add to that list, although they're not on the list of lifeline utilities, the consumer goods distribution system seemed to be able to continue and operate well. It was always going to be hard for the water and the sewage sections to continue to operate by dint of the construction and the layout of the system. Again, at the risk of being a bit hypercritical well after the event, I think our success in restoring water and sewage to residents could have been improved had we employed some more innovative thinking and out-of-the-square options for how you make those reconnections. Literature on resilient organisations suggests that the resilient ones, the successful ones, are those with a strong leadership and a strong, focused culture that encourages problem solving in a crisis at all levels. And I would suggest that as a hint for how you develop a greater degree of resilience in your critical lifelines. Having had considerable time to think about readiness in the community, I wonder if we have developed the community engagement model sufficiently. It seems to me that if the community, however you define it, is involved in civil defence planning well before anything happens, and that roles and responsibilities and report lines are set up and practiced before the event, they will know what to do. If it works well, the authorities will get a good flow of information, and the authorities in turn should be able to provide an accurate and fast response to the affected area when it needs to. If we can do this, the community will feel that they have been part of the response as opposed to having the response happen to them. Now, I appreciate this might be contentious, but if we are to truly have resilience in the community and have them better able to deal with a local crisis, then we must involve them in the preparation and then involve them in the response. As I said at the outset, overall the response was good, and again I take this opportunity to acknowledge the superb effort put in by the community and many of you and your organisations that helped to make it a success. But there is much more that we can do to make it even better next time round. To that end, this year we will run the New Zealand Shakeout Drill in September to help citizens and organisations better understand what they should do in the case of an earthquake and give them the opportunity to put those drills into action. This is a big undertaking across the country, but it is a critical one for awareness and readiness. I would urge each of you to get your organisation and your family involved in Shakeout between now and 09/26 on the 26th of September, so that we are aware and well drilled. And there are members of the MAC team here, Joe Gard and Anita Coman, who are available to answer any questions you may have about the Shakeout drill. So to conclude, the Christchurch earthquake has put us all to the test. But I think we can confidently say that our approach to civil defence and emergency management and the framework in which it operates has come through that test well. The concept of pursuing resilience through the use of the 4 Rs is sound and I think does not need to be changed. So too, the way that the responsibilities for implementing civil defence in all 4 phases is delegated to local government, supported from the national level. The provision for the government to centralise the coordination and control of the response at the national level when the scale demands it has also shown to be a sound approach. But there are areas in which some improvements could be made in readiness and in the way the response is conducted. And for us to ensure that the lessons from Christchurch are sheeted home in other areas to ensure they are as resilient and as prepared as they can be. Our experience indicates there is a strong expectation in the public that those responsible for civil defence in all its phases are able to deliver, and especially from local government, to be able to meet its responsibilities in risk reduction as well as readiness and the ability to respond to the emergency. As emergency management professionals, we need to heed that expectation and ensure that we can live up to what the public expects of us. The public also expects to be involved in the crisis, and the more we involve them in preparing for a disaster, the more resilient they will be and the better focused the response to that community will be. Involving the community relies on generating effective relationships and trust that has to be put in place before the event. In a similar vein, the Christchurch experience stresses again how important it is to ensure that there are effective relationships in place between the civil defence emergency management people and the key response partners, such as the emergency services, the infrastructure providers, critical suppliers, saying nothing of all those agencies that are involved in delivering welfare services. It is no good trying to build those relationships on the day amid the panic and the chaos. It is easy to be critical of the performance well after the event and with the benefit of hindsight while we're sitting in a much calmer situation. I would not want you to go away with the impression that I think the efforts fell short of the mark, because they did not. And I am pleased and very grateful for the tremendous efforts put in. So to conclude, Christchurch has taught us lots. I think we're on the right track. We've come a long way, but there are still a number of aspects that can be improved, and I look forward to working with you to develop those enhancements and to implement them in all areas of New Zealand.